get turned on.
I meet with the 14 leaders for 3 days. We work on middle school planning, middle school calendaring, kind of middle school philosophy, rules, all sorts of things. So that's 14 leaders, 3 days at the end of the school year and 3 days prior to the start of the school year.
So that reduction would cut those 5 days out of the plan, 3 days out of the planning process. Okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Is there any way to make that larger? It's really hard to see what it says and what those numbers are.
I don't think you did it.
Do you have copies of this document?
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's get those up.
Well, let's see if we have enough. Yeah, there you go.
All right, so this is tier 1. We'll get to tier 2 next. Thank you.
You came at the tier ones, right? Yeah.
Tier 1.
Yeah. This is what's up on the screen right now. We'll give you one at a time. Right, Tom. Let's keep going here.
So the next one is CLS, 10% reduction, $9,540.
That's supplies, textbooks,
Yep.
yada yada yada.
Yep.
Right?
Curriculum, same type of thing, more towards professional development in that, reducing that by 10%, $3,550. Curriculum development, this is money set aside to do curriculum writing in the summer, reducing it from $75,000 down by $10,000. Next one is the library clerk, reducing library clerk
Across the district.
Across the district. Under operation and maintenance, this is a 5% reduction, $13,935. I felt as though that not the 10% wasn't required here. Our capital project, there's things that need to be taken care of. Under operation and maintenance also, we have a retiring maintenance worker, and the idea is to create a hybrid groundskeeper cleaner position at a savings of $68,000. RHS, $20,000 reduction to their supplies and materials, field trips and equipment. The next one here is AP exams. Reducing most of this budget from $15,000, reducing it by $14,500, leaving $5,000 in the account, or $500 in the account. Reducing co-curriculars by $10,000. That includes benefits and that too. So that just isn't strictly a salary. And then under the tech department, a 10% decrease in supplies, software, and equipment of $6,100. All this in total is a little over $227,000.
Tom?
Yes.
The maintenance worker, that's salary and benefits, correct? That's not just
Correct. It's salary and benefits. Salary and benefits. Correct.
Got salary, benefits, social security, right? I mean, it's
Health
all
insurance,
those related costs,
fund,
right?
yeah.
So I would also want to mention at this point that just to be fair to the administrators who are here this morning to answer your questions, that this might be the understatement of the year, but I'll say it anyway. Not everything on this list or the next list are things that they're jumping up and down with glee and happiness to see on a list of reductions. Some of them were brought forth by the administrators, others were not. And one of the reasons that it's important that they're here today and that you have an opportunity to talk to them is to find out from them what's the impact on their programs. And we expect them to advocate for their programs. There's nothing on any of these lists that are throwaways, that are things we're not using. I mean, these are all going to have an impact. We hope that the impact especially on the Tier 1 options, will be minimal or less impactful than I think you'll see some of the things on the second list we're going to go over. But I just wanted to make sure I contextualize their input into this process fairly, and I hope I've done that. And they'll either glare at me if I haven't, or they'll do a slight nod of the head if I have. I think I have, anyways. So also, just for context, we started off with a likely $3,555.44 shortfall to the tax levy cap limit. So if we reduced all of the things on the list Tom just reviewed with you, that would leave us a remaining gap of $127,911. Again, assuming no more state aid to offset any of that. That's still in play, obviously. So maybe we should go to the second list. Let's get these out first.
Okay, as a part of this budget process and in the first draft, we currently have a .8 position in the BMS budget for this current year. Anticipation of a teacher who is on a leave of absence returning to a 1.0 position. That 1.0 position is restored in the current budgets. So a .8 or a .2 reduction would be a reduction in bringing us back to the current level of science.
That would maintain the status quo for this year.
Maintain the status quo, right, correct. Just other ideas at BMS, reduce the guidance aid from 12 to 10 months, reducing the summer guidance days to reduce it by 5 days. They currently are budgeted for 20 days of additional work during the summer, both in the middle school and the high school. So budgeted 20, this would reduce it by 5. This .2 art really shouldn't say CLS, it's really the district. This is, no, wait a second, sorry.
No,
I'm trying to remember what that art was. Oh, that was just to let you know what a .2 reduction in art is. The flying squad is twice a week on Wednesdays and Thursdays. They have 2 substitutes who come in that help fill in while meetings are done and different initiatives are taken, so that teachers in the classroom can work with other teachers in many different areas for that. Also here, kind of a holdover from prior years, the math AIS, a .4 position, a .4 tech integration at CLS. The next one is music, RHS, BMS. We have a retirement. Currently 100% or a full-time equivalent 1.0 is in the budget. At CLS, reducing the assistant principal from 12 to 10 months. Reducing a typist from 12 to 10 months. These are just basically what the savings would be. A part-time teacher aide for lunch duties, a reduction of that. Computer leases, if that was to be reduced. Director of technology, reducing from a 12-month to a 10-month position. High school guidance aide, same thing. Reducing the summer guidance days from 20 to 15, which reduction of 5 days. At the high school, eliminating part-time aides during the middle of the day, coming up to $25,000, and reducing the middle school, high school assistant principal from 12 to 10. That is a has a total of $294,100.
So just as context for that, the gap, assuming all of the reductions in Tier 1 were made, would remain as 127,911. So that means we would need that amount of money from the Tier 2 reductions to be flat at the tax levy cap limit. So we need 127,911 of Tier 2, leaving 166,189 not needed to get to the tax levy cap.
And again, these are not arranged in any order other than alphabetical.
Right.
No, I tried to do it alphabetically. So
I mean,
it's like they do it quite
that might be a
completely.
next step in the process, but I didn't want to be doing that until we had a chance to get some more information and you guys had an opportunity to provide me with some feedback. So they're all equal on these lists at this point in time. So we turn it back to the board, I guess. Is there anything else we need to go over before we get to some dialogue with the building principals? Any other information that would be helpful for you to have to serve as context to your questions?
Yep.
Okay.
So we open up for
It's-
questions.
Yes, this is the board's opportunity.
Diane?
I guess I'll just start at A.
So I guess start.
That's Steve, that's you. So I have two questions. So the first one would be if this
No,
reduction...
direct us to a specific tier because we have two pages.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tier 1, A, starting at the beginning.
That's fine.
This reduction, is that, can you talk about if that specifically is something? Is it a cutback in games or specific uniforms, or is it just generally reduce that amount?
This is the first time I'm seeing that number,
Okay,
so it's really difficult to speak to that.
okay.
The athletic budget, as all budgets, have been cut significantly over the last few years. $10,000. We've traditionally been able to run every team that we've had as long as students have been interested in participating on those teams. Maybe as we see that lower enrollment come up, maybe some of our teams will not be able to be filled. That could be savings there.
Okay,
I would say we have budgeted items for state competition. We don't always know which teams are going to qualify for state competition. And, that's a good problem to have if we had to find that money. Those are just some thoughts on the top of my head.
the other thing, if you could talk about, and I know you did a presentation to the board, but if you could talk about some of the teams that we've had trouble filling, whether filling 3 teams, modified, JV, and what that would look like if we either ended those teams or phased them out. Depends on the team. Some of them, they're in a building up process. Some of them, they've been declining. Could you talk specifically about those teams?
That's another extremely difficult balance that we've found not only here, but within our league. A lot of our neighboring school districts are in the process of looking at a new model where it goes modified A, varsity, and dropping JV programs. And unless everybody goes all at once, it makes it difficult to make that decision. Traditionally, what we've done is if we haven't run a team for 2 or 3 years, we've removed that money from the budget. So, field hockey has been one of the ones that has seen our numbers going down over time. This spring, softball seems to be, the JV team is probably not going to happen at this point. That being said, there are 23 kids signed up for modified. So will those kids all move up, and with that, we should take those teams? That's another difficult one to try to assess.
So those are the only 2 teams that we've had an issue with filling 3 teams?
With numbers this year?
Yeah, in the last year or so. Is that the only 2?
Currently, yes.
Okay. So all of our other sports we've been able to fill modified JV and varsity. And of those 2 teams, I mean, it sounds like softball is kind of like a new thing. You're not sure where that's going to go. And field hockey, is that something that's been more steadily on the decline?
Yes, it has.
2 years ago, we added one ninth grader to the field hockey program. We added no ninth graders to the field hockey program this year, and that we only had one 10th grader. So I would anticipate that those numbers are going to go down. That being said, our field hockey coach has been running a summer program, an after-school program over at Chancellor that's seen, a fairly decent number of third and fourth graders involved. Whether or not they're going to want to continue with field hockey as we progress.
So currently, we don't have a modified. We ran a JV and a varsity this year?
We're in just a varsity.
Just a varsity. And so if that were something we looked to cut, would your recommendation be like a phase-out program where, kids that have been playing?
I would hate to see kids lose that opportunity.
So you would recommend like a phase-out where, so the kids that are in the program now are able to finish out if possible?
And as I mentioned, in January, we've had the opportunity where we were approached by Pine Plains. Which wouldn't add to cost because we're already sending a bus to Pine Plains.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that possibility of joining forces with Pine Plains? Since we're already doing it, there'd be some economies, right, with the transportation. Do you see any other anticipated savings by joining with them?
Not with Pine Plains at this point.
Okay.
I don't believe.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is there just wouldn't be additional
Additional
transportation costs.
Right.
Thank you.
So Steve, since you're still on the hot seat, I'm going to jump on you. So I appreciate that this is a new number to you and you didn't realize that this was here. We had spoken to you this winter, I guess, about sort of ideas for the future, long-range planning. And you were talking about things like a new scoreboard in the middle school and those kinds of things. Is the scoreboard in this budget, and can we maybe consider things that are in your budget or your wish list that could be gone out for grants for? Are there those kinds of items that we could be creative about?
In this budget,
No.
it costs $6,000. There's only $2,500 in equipment money.
Okay, all right.
I just want to ask a follow-up question based on some of what we heard in Coffee with the Board earlier this week. A lot of parents showed up very interested in knowing about how independent fundraising could begin in the district to begin to try and supplement some of these needs and costs. Do you think there's a sort of a possibility of some sort of effort along those lines that could be mobilized, either through our PTSO or?
I would say yes, there is, but as we see with community groups, sometimes the involvement is only based upon whether or not those parents of those kids are involved.
Yeah.
We did have a booster club, which is now defunct, SOAR. So, again, it's going to take some community involvement, but it could be successful.
Should we just keep moving down the list of Tier 1? It seems like a good way to proceed. Questions for VMS?
This is sort of I'm going to ask this of all three of you guys, on this reducing supplies, textbooks, field trips, contractual and equipment. We seem to whittle away at this every year to try to close our gap. And I appreciate that Tom has collapsed a bunch of codes into this number, and it's up to you guys to figure out how you're going to use the money. But the red flags all go up when anybody sees field trips on a list. So I'd like you to talk about how you would creatively come up with ways to maintain our experiences for kids without, impacting negatively field trips and the supplies that you need for those. In this kind of thing, are we talking about limiting the number of chaperones that go on a trip, that, those kinds of things? Can you talk about your creative ways of dealing with this?
Sure. I know that's been something, when I started, don't quote me, but about 9 years ago, we were probably at like a $21,000 budget in my budget for field trips alone. We've gotten it back up to, my proposed for next year is about 8. But that's been going on for quite a while. I started in 8-9 school years, so starting in the 9-10 budget year is when I was involved in kind of those things. And we have, for the most part, been cutting or chipping away at some of those things, and then been able to add back in other years. So historically, what I have done always is we have a couple of things. One, primarily, very often, the monies that I have, that I budget for Chancellor, go to transportation costs. And the reason for that is very often, and not always, very often that's the most costly part of it. In fact, a lot of the field trips, there isn't an entry fee. It's more just how do we get the kids there and get them back, right? And chaperones, parents come and help, so there's no cost there. Teachers are with them, so that's really the primary cost. So we've been able to really secure, for the most part, on average, about 2 field trips per grade per year. One, by utilizing what we have in our code, and that's always why I like to try to kind of up that if and when we're able to, and the idea that to find more offerings, you never know what can come up in the middle of the year about great opportunities that we want to take advantage of. So in addition to that monies, historically we've gone to, we mentioned around the table before, PTSO, outside organizations who can grant. Historically, PTSO have been gracious enough to try to support at least 1 field trip per grade. Sometimes the Community Foundation has helped. We've had some years where I have 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 teachers that go for grants for that. The RSF has certainly been helpful this year. Actually, they helped us get to Ramapo with 4th grade very early in the school year. That was something brand new. So in all honesty, even though we're seeing some of the reductions over the years, I think utilizing that money is primarily for transportation, utilizing outside organizations that have helped, fund through grants some of these. And also there's been times where I want to say, like, we've had naturalists where we used to go to them, now they come to us. So we've also had a couple of areas where we've brought the people on campus to us, which has certainly significantly reduced the cost. So we've been able to preserve over the years, and certainly anytime I'm able to up that, I try to. But there's been years where we've had $5,000 budgets and still been able to preserve that. So that's usually how we deal with it, Chancellor.
Thank you.
I have a question. As far as transportation, are you allowed to shop around for transportation, or are you locked into the buses that we use for the kids?
They have transportation. They have an hourly rate that we utilize. That I haven't seen. I mean, it's been a while since I've looked, but even past companies that we've had, the rate has been about the same, somewhere between $70 and $80 an hour, I believe, for one bus. So no, we primarily use the company we have on contract.
The only time we've done that is when we need to take a coach bus. A lot of times relative to athletics, if kids are traveling to Buffalo for a sectional game, you don't want to put them on a school bus for 7 hours. I mean, they'd be crippled by the time they got to Buffalo. So, and so when we use a coach carrier, then Sue McCormick in our office here will call around, and I'm not sure how much variability she's found in the rates for that, but that's her job, is to to get pricing. And also with coach buses, we have to be concerned about making sure we have drivers who are who are insured and certified. We don't want to put kids on a bus with somebody unless we're sure they have the same level of clearance as any other transportation. But that's really the only time we're calling around to get an outside vendor. Okay. And I'm not sure that the price varies an awful lot there either.
Should we return to middle school, the question?
Sure. At the middle school level, you'll notice that my original budget, now is only $57,000 to start. So every time we chip away, we are, chipping into a very low number. I think my field trip budget currently is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,500 to $3,000. Those of you that have had students come through the middle school, you know that we don't take many field trips at all. Similar to Brett, we've had, we've been very fortunate over the years to, seek funding from outside grant funding, organizations, the PTSO, the Rhinebeck Science Foundation, the Community Foundation. again, similar to what Brett said, several years ago, and that's we've been fortunate enough to continue that. But we began bringing people into the building, rather than paying for transportation and sending them out. So we have a lot of opportunities for students that are funded through arts and education grants. Unfortunately, some of those monies, as budgets get tighter, are drying up as well. So there is an impact there. I do maintain a little bit of money in field trip, that isn't necessarily planned for in advance. It's given me the opportunity over the years to, allow, spend, a small amount of money to allow the anthropology club to go up to Bard College and, participate in an archaeological dig, for the 8th graders to, travel to the FDR, home museum this fall. Those were all things that really weren't planned for in advance.
Other questions?
Similar to my colleagues in the middle school and elementary school, when we can have experiences come to our campus, curricular experiences for students, we certainly pursue that. There are a handful, as you well know, where students must travel, go to Alana, for example, Metropolitan Museum Clark, sometimes to the Beacon, New Paltz. And for those instances, I try as much as possible to preserve some funding in our building budget, but we pursue opportunities with other granting agencies. And to date, we've been very fortunate. I think I've never had to turn down a request for a field trip for financial reasons or maybe other scheduling reasons, things of that nature. So we certainly try to continue to do that to the best of our abilities. But as I say, focusing on, to the extent possible, bringing experiences to our students here on campus so we would avoid transportation costs, supervision costs, things of that nature. But again, for some experiences, we can't bring a lot of here, obviously. We can't bring the holidays. So,
Just we'd like. Can I just follow up with that? So on those traveling field trips, they all, music and band always gets to go to the city for a big show. Are there ways to find economies with those kinds of things in terms of how many chaperones go? Can we look at things like, number of kids, get this one adult, not, we're going to go on a field trip, who wants to go with us? Can we try to sort of tighten those parameters up a little bit so the expectation is that you don't need one adult for every 2 kids? Or, I don't know what the parameter is right now. I was being
Yeah, I mean, we can always talk about those things. As you mentioned, we have a trip our music students take to Broadway, and some trips our band students take. I'm not aware of any board policy or guidance in terms of a ratio, so it's really a conversation with the person who organizes the trip, and it's a conversation. So you're going to Broadway and you're taking 60 kids, and what do you think is going to be the appropriate amount of supervision that you want the student to be doing that day? It's not, as I understand it, students just going into a theater and enjoying the show and then getting back on the bus and coming up. There's a little travel time involved. Given our world today, I probably err on the side of more supervision than less supervision. But it's a conversation with the person who organizes it.
Yeah, Jacqueline.
So this question is for all of the principals. Do you have a sense that your teachers are well aware of the opportunities for applying for grants, and what is their willingness? I recognize all of our teachers out there. I know it's a lot of extra work. I've applied for grants myself. I know it's a lot of extra work to apply for grants, but is there an openness and willingness to apply for those grants? Are they aware of the grant opportunities? Are they buying supplies themselves? Is there, how are teachers filling in the gaps, and what's the sense among in each of the schools about the openness of teachers to take advantage of those opportunities, not just for field trips, but for supplies and equipment and other areas where we might be cutting.
That ebbs and flows. I can speak for my building, the idea that some years, like I mentioned, the Community Foundation, Hudson Valley, great organization. There's been years, like I've said, where we've had no teachers that have applied for a grant, maybe for probably various reasons. It could be time, it could be, I will safe to say I have a much younger staff than I did 9 years ago, meaning young kids, houses, a lot of responsibility very early, and starting a new career. So that could be a factor. But I do, it just also has to do, I think, with ideas and things that have come up as per the curriculum, offerings. But like I mentioned, I think our local granting organizations, I think, my staff is very comfortable with, knowing that they're very often more coming to me with, hey, do you think this would be something I could apply for, rather than me saying, hey, maybe you want to apply for that. And that goes for the PTSO, RSF, and the Community Foundation, I think. PTSO and RSF obviously being the bigger ones because they're more local. And then I have I can speak for my PE department. I have a list of 40 grants they've gone for in the last 4 years. In fact, I literally have the list with me. So I think, they are very aware of it, and more often than not, I can say that they're coming to me with these ideas. And then there's other little things. So, and one thing I do want to answer is, yes, I can say, as my own experience, and then certainly with watching my staff over the last 9 years, every one of them spend their own money on supplies, of course. And that goes for saying that we're very lucky as a district where we're able to still give them, $300 each for supplies and materials, and then have a little bit on the side in case things pop up, a table breaks or something like that. But individual materials and supplies, sure, I think it's always a balance. Teachers are always dipping in their pockets to purchase little things that they need, orders for their, things like that. There are a lot of things I see in the building that I did not sign a PO for that I know came from somewhere, And on that note, I really only have about $100 of petty cash a year. So there's not a lot of people giving me receipts for things that they may purchase in advance and things like that. So certainly there's some, and that varies from person to person as far as how much comes out of their pocket. But I think the granting, I can speak for my building and my staff. I think they're very aware and continuing to look. Teachers Pay Teachers is another website that's been popping up a lot, where you come up with an idea, put it in, a teacher can buy it from another teacher. That's a great example of teachers just kind of, there's no POs that go with that. I have teachers really paying that out of their pocket. And Donors Choose has come up a little bit more often, which when I was in the city was huge. In fact, it was created in the city my first year in the Bronx, so it happened to be. So I was very aware of it, but I think we're getting to the point in a budget cycle and a budget environment where even districts like our own, which maybe didn't seem to have a need to get on there because we weren't as high need, are starting to realize that we could. So I've had a couple teachers ask me about Donors Choose, if I know about it, and blah, blah, blah. So they're reaching out. I think they're aware.
Diane, you had a question?
Oh, well, I don't know if the other buildings were going to answer. Jack wants first.
Very simply in the middle school, going back to what I was saying about field trips, about, in building opportunities, co-curricular opportunities, I'd say, 90% of them, if not more than that, are all grant funded. So, my seventh grade team does a series of field trips over the course of a week in the spring. I think the total cost for those series of experiences is somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000. And I think I spent $600 out of my building budget last year for that. So between the Community Foundation, a couple of other community organizations, the Rhinebeck Science Foundation, the PTSO, it was all grant funded.
Just to tag on, if you're talking about supplies, materials, textbooks, those always come from the general fund. And if teachers in the past have come to me and say, well, I need this for class, if it's a need, if it's not an enhancement, with Tom and Joe's support, I said, well, I think you have to find a way to make that come from the general fund. If we're talking about enhancements to the program, field trips, I can say that teachers are well aware of the opportunities available to them from the Community Foundation, RSF, PTSO. campus and education and certainly take advantage of those applications. And just to conclude at this point, our science department is working on a science lab initiative grant proposal through state through several Cahill's offices. So they're hard at work at that, and we're looking forward to submitting that next week.
Yeah, before I ask my question, we heard at the coffee with the board, community members asking about ways to donate. I mean, I would love to see, if we had on our website a list of requests that we need. If someone wanted to buy a $6,000 scoreboard, okay, or something small, tissues for everyone at Chancellor, things that our teachers are providing. It'd be a great way if someone wanted to donate those things if we had a list. So that'd be something that'd be great to have. I wanted to go back to just the field trips. In your budget, is the cost of chaperones included in that, or is it just transportation and the cost of getting in? Because I know that's not such an issue in your building, but like in the high school, when you take if 8 teachers go, you have to pay substitutes for the teachers that are on the trip. So is that cost in this figure, or does that come out somewhere else?
My understanding, I'm sorry.
There are codes in the under instruction which are just for chaperones.
Okay,
I do not remember off the top of my head how much, but there's like an allotment for chaperones for the musical. There's a couple different lines. There is separate lines for chaperones for the athletic department. So
those reductions
various.
don't address chaperones.
No, I mean, but that's how we could reduce the chaperones instead of supplies materials. We could reduce that if they're able to secure lower cost type of options.
Okay.
But as Tom mentioned, in the high school anyway, we're really talking about substitute coverage.
Right.
Because if teachers are chaperoning during the school day,
Right.
that's their school.
Right, exactly.
Frequently, a large number of students are going from a certain grade level. We don't need coverage for those classes because the students aren't here.
Right. It's more of an issue in your building, I think, than either of the other buildings. You go as a grade level.
Yeah, Jack.
I just want to add to Diane's comment about the idea that parents have expressed interest to us of how can I donate? How can I support, specifically? And I work at Dutchess Community College, and this year they started an initiative for a different purpose. I forgot what it's called. It's not a supply closet, but every week in the newsletter out to the community, they request donations, specific donations. This week we need instant oatmeal packets and pencils and tissues or whatever. And so a closet is kept, and another community parent, our community has come to me and suggested, what if we got a closet going with donated supplies and maybe we can, specifically request, these are things we need, please, this week, everybody donate construction paper or whatever. But I just wanted to share, I don't know if it's the right venue, but those are ideas that have come to me and seems relevant. So.
Should we move on to curriculum? To ask questions about that, Marvin, I don't know if you want to speak to that with these proposed cuts.
Historically, those 2 budget lines that you see there have been used for, maybe a fair characterization would be that they're like innovation funds. They're monies that are used for purposes like paying teachers to write curriculum in the summertime. We've sort of created a tradition here over the last several years, I want to say probably 15 years or so, in which we have worked with professional faculty to identify, needs in the area of curriculum updates and so on and so forth. Oftentimes either in response to their own review of their curriculum or state education initiatives of one sort or another. And we ask them to apply every year to do summer curriculum projects. And it's kind of been a pretty effective way of engaging professional faculty. We have a strong tradition here of of supporting their interest and their work and respecting their professionalism and so on. So that's really what that money is for, generally speaking. On the other side of that, the supplies, the supplies, travel, professional development, that's more, that's seed money that pays teachers to go to things that they may see throughout the course of the year or even over the summer to improve their practice. And we have a whole variety of those things that come along. Those things become, as the year progresses, because the funds are tight in on one of those budgets at the school levels, it's not uncommon for us to collaborate, with the principal's offices to fund teachers going to these kinds of things. So to the extent that we reduce those things, it costs money, we won't be able to say yes to those requests as time goes on.
Are there grant opportunities for those sorts of professional development trips and costs?
Sure. And over the years, we have funded professional development for faculty and people who have participated in projects. They tend to be tied directly to the projects that we have applied. I'm thinking of the STEM lab in the elementary school and being able to pay for professional development is tied to that. So they tend to be project-oriented grants, not just general professional development grants that we might have discretionary control over.
Other questions about, yes, Laura?
So, $10,000 isn't a small number. Can you contextualize it for us? How much less innovative curriculum work would happen in the summer?
How innovative can we be this year? Oh, man.
No, I always ask you to be more innovative, Marvin.
Well, Marvin, and maybe another way to try to answer that question, if I could, would be to give people kind of the context for the need for curriculum development. There's a lot going on at the state. Kind of what's the landscape in that respect? I'm not sure if that is to your point or if it's just a hook on, but that's what I think about when I'm thinking about curriculum work and like, what do we have to do? Maybe not the innovative part so much as what are we going to be required to do by change at the state level that we need to make sure we can accommodate. So I apologize for jumping into your question, or maybe you can answer both, Marvin. I know you can, actually.
You've got all
I'll take a shot. See how we so I'll start with Joe's and then I'll come back to you. So right now, most people may be aware, but maybe not, the State Education Department in New York is undergoing a mass transformation in the curriculum and instruction and assessment in the state. We're in the middle right now of a sort of for lack of a better word, sort of a moratorium on the old standards and a roll into new standards, and commensurate with that would be obviously new assessments that will be coming from the state. That process is looking to be finished up in the 2021, 22. They're playing with when they're going to play that out. We're in that transition period right now. Most of those curricular areas are in what we might call the awareness phase. So there are folks going out to professional development, we're bringing people in, and people are doing their own reading and study and some conversation about how to respond to that. And that's really across math, English language arts, social studies, science, and the arts particularly, and then there are other areas that are coming in too. As you might imagine, in the great state of New York, there's no shortage of new ideas on what schools should be doing coming from the State Ed Department. So we have to be responsive to that. So to the extent that we have fewer funds, it makes it more challenging for us to do that. Mr. Phelan and I often talk about, when we get all of our applications in, typically, we look at what we've got available to us and we try to prioritize them and we try to fund what we can. On the innovation side, that's an interesting question because this district, something I think is a strength that's baked into the way we've operated all these years, is that we have sort of incentivized the thought process in the professional faculty, and I think in all of us, that there is this idea of continuous improvement in what we're doing. And so by offering, an incentive when you don't have the demands of the teaching year sort of staring down at you to really kind of roll up your sleeves, collaborate with people to improve what you're doing to get ready for the ensuing school year, has served us well, because there's a value and an ethos that A, they own it, B, we kind of respect their work, and C, we're incentivizing that kind of innovation. So I think that's hard to calibrate, but I don't think we should leave that by sort of negating the importance of that value that is kind of baked into the way we've operated here. And I mean, I think it's fair to say the evidence is right there out in front of you. Our schools have a history of being very successful and well-run, and the curriculum and instruction is viewed as an envy in most places. So I think that's kind of the answer to your question.
Kind of, yeah. I don't want, as you say, half of all of that great work that happens in the summer to disappear. There are things we have to do, but we always want our faculty to be able to have the time and the resources to be creative too. So I'm trying to understand how much this might cut into that.
Can I ask a follow-up? If those new standards and assessments are supposed to come online, what you said, 2021? Is that the school year?
There's kind of a window there. It's like the 2021,
2022, so
it's kind of calibrated as to, excuse me, when this state will start going operational with new assessments. Right. So we're kind of backwards designing against that.
Right.
Sometimes with state ed, you may find this is surprising. That's a moving target. I'll tell you, one day it's going to be this date, and then you'll find out in 3 months it's a year later. So.
Well, it's laudable that it's not occurring this fall, at least. So
you have a little bit of a window,
yeah.
So we're not going to be caught up short right now. What you don't want to do is do what I've seen in a lot of districts in the state do is, it's the balloon payment phenomenon.
Exactly.
Right. So you say, oh, manana, and so now all of a sudden manana shows up. And,
right. So since we've been involved in long-range planning, I guess that would be a question/comment about if we see this happening 3 years down the road, how do we sequence or think about inviting applications for that summer curriculum work to make timely progress as we know what the curricular needs are over those summers in the interim.
I would also say that even in better budgetary times, we've always had to prioritize and those project requests and sometimes cut them back a little bit, on a few, though very few occasions, just say, no, we're not going to fund that because it doesn't support our educational goals. So, I mean, that's kind of an ongoing process, yeah. And it'll be no different this summer for next year either. I mean, it's just.
Steve?
I mean, I'm just back to prioritizing the list. I mean, we approved some summer work this year that used to be done at team time. So I would encourage everybody to kind of look at when work can be done at team time versus summer. Madagascar is one of the things that I'm thinking of that spilled out to summer. Maybe that doesn't really need to be there, and that those funds can be used for something else. So I would, again, focus on what we're approving for summer, that maybe that fits better into team time.
Other questions about curriculum? The library clerk? The library clerk. Issues that'll impact across the district. Any questions?
The librarian. How this would impact across the district. Because Tom, you said it's not one building, it's across district. So how would that impact? I don't know if the administrators are in on that.
We've discussed that because it has been a position we've talked about for quite a few years. And John and Ed and I can speak for all three of us, have talked about the possibility, not the possibility, if we do wind up cutting and sharing between the two buildings. So, and it probably wouldn't be, morning in my building, afternoon here, would probably be maybe 2 days in my building, 3 days over here. I think that job description is a little bit different between my building and the two buildings over here. So we felt that we could kind of share that service across the two levels.
Sheldon, maybe we should ask you about the Tier 1 items that are in your wheelhouse. Anything you can tell us? What do you want to know? All right. Yes.
Just about the person that's retiring is, main responsibility during the summer was for the athletic fields and mowing and trimming. Notice as a maintenance worker, he was outside pretty much from the beginning of spring sports to the end of fall sports. I have two guys that work outside, so I'm basically losing 50% of my outdoor staff. Even in the position, and in fact, wanting to rehire. I mean, Kevin was a carpenter, and in the winter he would build bookcases and counters for people. He would do welding, repair furniture. In the winter, also plowing. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough working without. Even if I were to hire somebody else, I wouldn't find somebody at his quality. But it is what it is. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to handle it. I might have to take somebody from the custodial staff, lose a custodial position, and fill that position. I'm still not sure how it's going to work with a hybrid position. Maybe it won't work. That's something to think about. Athletic fields are going to take a big hit. It was a passion of his. We have some of the best fields.
We have some of the best fields in the area.
In the state, I would say. And so, especially spring sport, maintaining baseball and softball, it's not going to be the same without them. That's for sure. Even if hiring another person. I don't know. No, that's going to work. But I understand we're looking under a tax cut. We've got to do what we've got to do.
Mark, you have a
So,
question?
yeah, I mean, I guess you partially answered my question already, but if you're going to have a hybrid position, I was going to ask if you would envision that person doing, outdoor work during, for example, outdoor work during the summer and other work during the winter, or how you envision that
That's a happening. problem too. It's like during the summer, we do our summer cleaning. I think we're one of the only school districts I know of that doesn't hire part-time work in the summer to help out with summer cleaning. So it's going to be really hard to pull somebody out of the custodial staff, to work outside. I'm envisioning maybe overtime. I have to talk to Tom more about that, like maybe adding maybe $10,000, $15,000 back in for overtime. If I can find the right person and hire within, then then I don't have to lose somebody. Because if I have to hire to fill that position, I'm going to lose somebody in probably the custodial position. So, I was thinking somebody could come in, do some custodial work, and then during the summer, say go out and mow for 2 hours every day. I mean, I do 10 hours of overtime or 8 hours of overtime every week doing mowing fields. Got a lot of mowing, you got trimming. I'm going to have to sort it out once that decision's made. We're just going to have to sort it out and do the best we can.
Anyone else have a question down here? Questions for Sheldon?
I think we didn't speak to the AP exams.
Well, ask him.
Sure. Several years ago, I can't recall exactly how many, the district assumed the cost of AP exams for those of our students who take an AP course. That's not a requirement. It's not part of the school district to do so. So in order to realize the savings, the thinking would be to remove the local practice expectation that students enrolled in an AP course sit for the AP exam, make that optional for the students who wish to do so. And in that way, should students wish to sit for an AP exam, the cost would be borne by their parents.
And the cost is what, Ed?
It's for example, it's going up year to year between $89, $90, $95, something of that nature per exam.
Can I ask a question, since you've probably seen how it works with the district assuming the cost and the district not assuming the cost? Do you notice any difference in the pattern of enrollment, students' willingness to take this, or families' sense that it's something that is appropriate for their student based on whether or not they assume the cost of the exam?
I'd say sitting here right now that the numbers of students who have enrolled in AP courses, of course, we've expanded. You've expanded AP offerings. That's increased. I wouldn't say that the again, if we remove the local practice or local requirement of mandating students sit for an exam, if we remove that, I would anticipate that there'd be no change in terms of students who are enrolling in the evening course.
Okay. And it looks as though there's some small fund remaining to help with students who actually have financial need. Is that-
Correct. I had taken a look at it yesterday. The cost for a person who's on free or reduced is $24. So that would be, so this would pick up their portion, that family's portion of a free and reduced student. It's $24.
And what did you
last
say
year.
was the standard rate for non-free and reduced lunch
It's
students?
84. But I think you build in money for mentoring or chaperoning that activity. Proctoring is the right term for that. So even though the test is 84, they do require just a little bit more, and that's to cover the proctors who are proctoring during that exam.
And, yeah. I just wanted to ask one follow-up, which is, obviously, as students build their program and they work with their guidance counselors, I don't even imagine I need to say this, but the guidance counselors obviously would continue to encourage and make those options known to students so that they wouldn't think that the cost should be a barrier to enrollment.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if the student, the $24 for free and reduced lunch students, whether that would be an automatic, like they don't have to apply for it, it just happens? Or would they actually have to
go and request it?
Well, sitting here right now, I would collaborate with Mr. Brunel's office to make sure that, again, it's very sensitive information, confidential information.
Yeah, exactly.
We'd ensure that those students were covered in an appropriate way.
Okay, I would just want to make sure they don't have to
Oh, no, we have a list
seek out
that's,
application for,
he gives me a list of everybody's taken AP exam, I go through it and
Good.
notate who
Some free and reduced.
is free and reduced. So that way, when they fill out the form,
Yeah.
it automatically takes out those kids in the test they took.
great.
This is a little bit different because we would not be providing a bill to, I don't even know how they sign up for AP exams. I don't, oh yeah, you have to pay it through the school. I was thinking ACT and SATs, you got to pay directly to them. APs goes through the school district itself.
Go back to the process we had a number of years ago. The students sign up, they bring a check to the school.
Oh, we collect the money
We
back
collect the
in the
money.
day? Yeah.
And is it your sense that, I mean, obviously many school districts already have this practice of not paying for, I mean, is this a minority sort of position to pay for students' AP exams in your experience, or we don't know? We don't know the percentage of schools.
I think it is, but I'd have to hedge and say that I need to talk to my colleagues in the county.
Okay. Any other questions? Tech? Oh, no, co-curricular activities, sorry. We need to have a moment for questions about that, if anyone has. Yes?
I have a quick question, only because this line appeared last year on one of our many cut lists, and I think we were under the impression that the co-curriculars had been reduced for low enrollment this year already.
That's correct.
So
They have been?
I'm
Correct,
confused
yeah.
about why this is still on the list if we had already
Further
reduced it.
reduction.
It's further reduction? Yeah.
Okay, this is exactly the same line as last year, so that's why I'm asking.
Oh, I have to go back and look at that.
It would represent 4 co-curricular activities. Many of our, as you know, co-curricular activities, just getting into double-digit enrollment. We have a number who are really into the single digits. So, we have to make hard choices. That may be somewhere
Okay. Tech. There's a line here for supplies, software, and equipment. Other questions for Steve Jensen? You want to tell us anything about how this would impact?
Yeah, basically, these are 3 different lines that I have, and some of those lines are really safety nets in case there's an emergency. And so those, my major concerns would be that we have quite a number of projectors that are aging, just the equipment's aging. And so even though we've been able to address some of that going forward, you know, I don't know what next year holds. It's you know, you can't predict what's going to happen there. On the software side, the only areas of concern that I have there is that there are two pieces of software right now that we currently aren't paying anything. One is Smart Notebook, but we may have to go to the subscription platform of that as we upgrade our operating systems, because some of that will happen, and so those who use Smart Notebook will have to address that and then supply those needs. The other is the Adobe Suite. We bought that many years ago. It's the Photoshop and InDesign and those kinds of things. Now we're getting to a point where the version that we're on is aging out. And as a matter of fact, I tried to pull back a thing I had gotten from a printer from last year, actually last year's budget newsletter, and I could not open it up because the version that I have is older than what the printer was using. So we're coming to a point, and that's an expensive product. So we will, instead of having a site license, we'll probably have to target that to certain programs in certain areas. So we will probably be narrowing the focus of that going forward. But right now, it's not an impact on our budget, but it will impact in the future. So those are the only things that I have concerns about in that regard. Though we do tend to underspend on these items only because primarily they are safety nets. And so most of the time, if there's any money left over, it's usually rolled back into the fund balance, and we take it from there.
And I think the other thing too is we have to really encourage our staff across everywhere to print to copiers, because instead of using toner for printer, you know, our printers, the toner from our copiers is free of charge. So the more they use or get towards it, I've been seeing a higher use of the copiers as far as instead of printers. That will help too, by not having to go out and purchase toner for individual printers, as we use copiers more and more as printers.
Any other questions, Frank? I'd like to propose, before we move on to the next tier of cuts, we take a short break, if that is amenable to all. All right, we're going to take a short break, 5-minute break. Thank you for coming back from the break. So we're going to move to tier 2, and I think what we're going to do is just open up for questions about tier 2 proposed cuts. We would like to move through those relatively quickly so we have time for public comment. We do have many members of the community here. We want to hear from them. So I would propose we try to move through this in the next half hour. So please move to that sheet and let us open with questions from any board members.
Keep sighing.
Okay.
Go ahead, jump in. You just did.
Rather than going through this line by line, this obviously is the harder list to get through, but we are in this unfortunate position of living in a tax cap world with declining enrollment. So we have fewer kids to educate. So I guess if we could maybe go by building, there are multiple things on this list from each building. And for the full district, if we could talk a little bit about the impacts and how we're going to mitigate the pain if we can. You know, we're all trying to think creatively and do more with less, so this list obviously is illustrating that. If we could sort of go through building by building and talk about how we can maintain the level of, you know, the quality of our educational community with these things under consideration. So anybody can jump. Whoever would like to start.
I mean, I can start with the first 3 things at the top of the list. You know, reducing EMS science by a 0.2 FTE is not really a reduction to the program at this point. I had a 1.0 FTE teacher who has been on child rearing leave for the last 2 years, is returning to the district and returning to the building. However, the woman who has been working in her position has been a 0.8 FTE leader replacement. So while I believe it will have impact elsewhere, it won't necessarily have impact to the middle school program. The guidance aid reduction from 12 months to 10 months is something that I'm not recommending being on this list, as well as the reduction in summer guidance days. I've got one guidance aide in the middle school. I've got one guidance counselor. I'm not really sure who will do all of the student scheduling, which is what takes place all summer long for the guidance aide. And that position is reduced, and I have no guidance aide. I don't know who picks up that work. My guidance counselor spends the summer working on AIS placements, working with Emily Davison to place CSE students, tweaking the master schedule as the master schedule has been constricted over the years, and as we have more shared staff between the middle school and high school buildings, it's become more and more difficult to schedule students that require additional needs, have additional needs. So we've got a number of CSE students, a number of 504 students in the middle school. They work together, my guidance aide, my guidance counselor, with Emily and with Mark, to make all of that scheduling happen over the summer.
John, is that a complete reduction for the summer guidance days? I mean, is that going from,
No, that goes from 20 to 15.
so that's going from 20 to 15 days?
Yes.
5 days.
Okay, so it's just removing 5 days, okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Buckley? Steve?
I thought there was some talk about moving some of the master scheduling with the students up through May to have it done earlier in the year. I know the high school had talked about that. I'm just curious why that's not being done in your school.
It is being done in my school. The bulk of the master scheduling is completed prior to the end of the school year. However, we continue to work over the summer months on AIS placements. Typically, though, they promise to do so every year. The state doesn't provide us with state assessment data until the middle of July, sometimes late July, sometimes as late as early August. So some of that work doesn't get done. We don't quite know how many sections of academic support we need. Study hall, band and chorus. While we don't have many electives in the middle school, band and chorus placements are still being worked on. Accelerated math placements, particularly for 6th grade students, 5th grade coming into 6th grade, don't typically take place until the summer. There's recommendations that come over from the teachers, but they don't come over until the school year is complete. So while the bulk of the master scheduling is complete, and everything that, for the most part, that impacts the high school and shared staff as well, there are minor tweaks that happen over the summer months as well.
I agree with that, but I think, keeping everything the same with respect to summer work when there's 20% less kids to deal with doesn't seem realistic to me, right? So I think we need to try some things and be a little bit more efficient here. We're not talking about cutting, we're talking about 20-25% of the time away. It seems to me that they should be able to get that work done with a lot less kids to have to move, especially if part of the scheduling is going to be taking place throughout the school year.
I'm not sure how to answer that question or to respond to that. The enrollment numbers in the middle school in particular, while the enrollment across the district has been declining, the enrollment in the middle school has actually remained constant over the last couple of years. And as a matter of fact, with I think 19 new students that came into the district over the course of the summer. And again, all of those students had to be, met with, and schedules had to be developed for those students. Our enrollment is actually up.
In the high school, you're of course absolutely correct. We'll start writing the schedule probably in April with an aim to having the schedule draft completed in May. And we know the schedule's completed when we've been able to successfully load about between 50 and 55% of student requests. So that leaves about half of student requests that still have to be resolved. That involves a lot of meetings with parents, with students. So that certainly will take place the end of the school year pushes into the summer months as well. And as John noted, the master schedule, once we have the core courses, academic courses, looking at academic support classes, then that drives study halls, that's going to drive teacher schedules to some extent, aid schedules, so all of that takes place over the summer.
Yes, Diane.
Would you say, though, that these summer hours for the guidance counselor have been the same amount of hours they've had since either one of you have been here, that long?
In the high school, the hours have increased, I think, by 2 days, 2 or 3 days. And those requests have been made due to the number of our students who are returning from hospitalization. Some of our students who need extra supports when they return to school, so they've worked to help facilitate those transitions back to school.
So just so I'm clear, you're saying that you think the number of hours or days over the summer has increased since you've been, increased slightly?
That's my recollection. I think I've requested for each counselor in the high school 11 or 12 days, 11 or 12 at the end of the school year, 11 or 12
And John, is that about the same? 20 days been about where it's been since you've started?
About the same. That's the max that she has available to her. There have been years when she hasn't used that many days, but typically it's been 20.
Why don't we move into one of the other buildings then? Do you want to continue with
Sure.
high school?
Just working down for the music position, if I'm understanding that correctly, that would indicate, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we'd be looking at appointing or recommending a .8 position as a replacement.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a .2 would equal to a brand-new music teacher, a .2.
So we have, I'm not trying to say, so we would be bringing next year, hypothetically speaking, a .8 FTE music teacher in, or a .2?
No, a .8.
.8.
.8, yeah.
This is the reduction, is .2.
So in looking, with Mr. Berg and Mr. Chemnitzer at the current faculty members' schedule, her schedule represents, 5 or 6 contact periods, instructional contact periods per day with their students, either between courses or lessons. So in looking at a .8, we would look at, a concurrent reduction in those contact periods per day. So that could represent either an increase in lesson group sizes. Typically most of them are, 4, 5, 6 students, or a reduction in one of the courses. It would be in high school that the teacher has taught. This year, there's high school chorus, men's ensemble, women's choir, and a music theory course. So moving ahead with a .8, we'd be looking at either eliminating one of those courses or increasing lesson group sizes to concurrently reduce the number of contact periods per day.
At our coffee with the board, we were recently told about state mandates for lessons. Do you know anything about that? I didn't know that was true. And I mean, art is not mandated generally, right? I'm not art. I'm sorry, chorus and band. Music.
I'm not aware of any mandates regarding lessons in school. There's as you know, a unit of credit requirement in art, which can be satisfied in music or in some of the graphic arts. But I'd have to do some research or consult with my colleagues regarding mandates.
Because that was brought to our attention, so I just wanted to be clear on that, because I wasn't sure if that was true.
Yeah, if we could have further information about that as we move along.
And my understanding is the same as Dr. Davenport's. That was news to me after doing this for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So stay on the high school?
Yeah, let's do the high school, yeah.
Can we not move on from music quite yet? Can we talk a little bit more about the lessons,
Sure.
Both for band and chorus? You said there are typically 4, 5, and 6 kids in those lessons?
Yeah, with some exceptions.
Is that choral and instrumental?
Choral and instrumental. In our school, students are taken for music lessons from a free period or lunch. In some schools, the students will come out of academic courses. That's not been our practice here. So that restricts to some extent the availability of students. So at the beginning of each school year, our music teachers will generate their lesson lists, and we'll provide them to Mr. Berg and myself. just so we have that information in case we need to find the student. So typically by the end of September, third week of September, we have that information.
And Ed, how often are lessons given?
Once a cycle, once every 4 days.
Every 4 days.
So, once every 4 days.
Jacqueline?
Just to clarify, you said students are not taken out of their academic classes for lessons? That's not my understanding of middle school, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, it is different in the middle.
Just wanted to clarify.
And that being said, as well, I should also add that before concerts, for example, a day or two leading up, we'll have just dress rehearsals. And in those instances, students will miss, with the teacher's permission, academic classes.
So I don't know if you know the answer to this, but if we were to change that and make the lessons, maximize the lessons, number of kids in the lessons, which would have to take them out of academic class, I mean, what are your, do you think that that would lead to less periods of lessons overall? I mean, right now it's spread out because it's dictated by the student schedule, it sounds like, right? I mean, just knowing the number of kids that we have in chorus and music, it seems like that would be a lot less periods of lessons being taught, right?
If students came out of academic.
If they were coming out of academic, if it was driven on, filling certain periods of, these are lessons periods, then we would have probably, we would have less need for as many periods scheduled. Yeah, wouldn't be spread out as much. Does that sound right? Sorry.
I have to sketch that out, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to look at the numbers and stuff. But I mean, in theory, it seems like it, right now, like I said, it's only based on lunches and free periods. So that's obviously not the most efficient way to schedule the most kids in a lesson. Right.
So yes, if we had, again, I'd want to consult the faculty. It does happen in other schools. But if we were to have students who come out of academic courses, have a wider range to select instead.
Right.
And of course, the downside to that is kids are missing academic time, so,
Sure.
So, in these lessons of 4, 5, and 6 kids, are those the only kids that are participating in the music program during that period? Or are you I'm trying to figure out if we can make lesson times, as Diane said, more efficient.
More efficient.
So, what's the maximum number of kids that should be in a lesson for chorus versus band? In band, I know you try to keep the instruments together and all of that. Chorus, I don't know why you'd need it to be smaller rather than a larger section, but maybe you can answer that.
That's a wonderful question. I'm not qualified.
Okay, if you could find
Laura?
it for us, that'd be great.
Jacqueline?
I'm guessing here, but having been a singer for a very long time, I would guess that it's sectionals. So you meet, all the altos, alto ones, alto twos, sopranos, or however, I'm guessing it's by sectionals.
And that would make sense, but if we're also juggling their schedules, I'm just wondering how it actually plays out.
So I'm mindful of the march of time, and we want to be sure that any particularly large issues that arise from this list are addressed.
Yeah.
So issues in the high school that we may want further information on.
If I
Please do.
continue, there's a few more
Yes.
items, and please give me the sign to stop talking if I talk too long, because I thought I'd provide a little peek behind the curtain regarding summer. In terms of our summer main objectives, they're twofold. First, we want to close out the school year. By that I mean collect data, look at some lagging indicators, look at disciplinary data, drill down and look at individual student performances, and with Mr. Berg's counsel, we suggest and think about refinements and improvements to the following year. And in order to do that, we rely on our guidance office to provide data reports, both current scheduling data reports, Regents exam reports, academic performance reports. So in that process, we look really at data-driven decision-making, and those decisions are implemented through the master schedule, which we finalize with our study halls, with our academic support placements. We're looking at also the room matrices and how our room usages function. We're looking at procedures within the school. We're also implementing those refinements and suggestions in our student handbook, in our faculty handbook, in our non-structural support staff handbook. Those processes all target the return or look at the return of our students at September 5th. Those processes are dependent upon our work in the guidance office to provide us information to make those decisions. And over the past 12 years, they've been relying upon a collaborative process between the assistant principal and my office, in which we bounce ideas off of each other. We'll look at successive drafts of schedules and handbooks and other plans and procedures in order to come up with the best final product. Add to that that the assistant principal is also responsible for reviewing and then scheduling for September and October all of our students' 504 plans in grades 6 to 12. And they can number from 75 to 100. So that's an added practice advocacy that Mr. Berg's office finalizes. So with all of those things, it's a key role, and it's a process I think that we've been able to put in place with some success over the past 12 years. If you are entertaining a reduction of summer guidance days or a reduction in assistant principal time, as I said, we're looking at September 5th to have students return to school. Of course, that's going to happen. And of course, all that work needs to take place, and it will take place. I will say it will take place without the benefit of a collaborative process and two sets of experienced eyes looking at schedules, looking at documents, and ensuring the best possible outcome. So that does not, those reductions do not have my recommendation. In terms of teacher aid hours, the elimination of those hours would most likely result in perhaps reassigning faculty members from a math lab or writing center in order to provide the supervision necessary in cafeteria or in the study hall.
Deirdre?
Yeah.
Have you talked to your teachers about the possibility of taking on these assignments? And if they'd be interested, willing, enthusiastic about doing that?
Well, I'll try to speak politically. My understanding is that teachers are required to provide a duty period to the school district. And unless I'm wrong, that duty period can be assigned by the building administration. So, no, I haven't talked to my teachers, or our teachers, about that. But if we need a study hall covered, or if we need a lunch duty covered, then we need a lunch duty covered.
Right. Okay.
Other questions, comments? I think we probably need to talk to Chancellor too.
So of the 7 positions that are there, just starting at the top, obviously the impact of the .2 art cut, is something, right now with some of the extra time we have in that person's schedule, there's K2 fine motor support, there's a lot of things that would go away as a result. One of the other concerns I certainly have is that, there's a big enrichment piece that this particular position really offers several times a year that you guys approve that I think would go away as a result because it just wouldn't fit into the schedule. So that's something I think that would be taken right off the table. Obviously, the dismissal and arrival duties, there's quite a few other, with some of that extra, 2 or 3 extra periods throughout an entire week, Ms. Johnson is able to push into K2 classrooms. She's able to offer, we have times where there's entire 5th grade classes working extra on projects with their teacher in that space, and there was time for that. There's quite a few other opportunities you can imagine in elementary school, K through 5. There are students, because of their developmental age, where they're really benefiting from extra time in that art room to just kind of get up and move and things like that. So there are a lot of different things that I think that position entails. So, and I have, if you'd like, I can certainly, I've been kind of compiling lists of some of that info and working with that staff, the specialist team in general, but, you know, as we're talking about responsibilities, I have quite a list of things that would really wind up going with, you know, another kind of, I think, detriment to that is we just, you know, recently spent time, the whole art department on the Artsonia portfolio, which is extremely time consuming. You can't use students' names, there's a lot of cropping, every individual photo has to be put up, so there's certain initiatives like that that would literally stop, that we just got started going, so there's certainly an impact there. Moving down to Flying Squad, which is Wednesdays and Thursdays, to give a little more information, I have a full-time, basically starting the second week of the school year and ending the second to last week in the school year. I have two subs that'll come in on Wednesday and then also on Thursday, so staff can sign up, because obviously you can imagine scenarios like a special ed teacher that works in 2 grades. One of those grades, that teacher's not going to have a common planning time ever with the teachers that he or she services, so the idea being Flying Squad twice a week, there's time where they can sign up together and get coverage for their class so that they can meet. So that's a big part of why Flying Squad has been put in place. We certainly use that for a child study team, weekly child study team coverage, or bi-weekly, however, depending on the need. CSE, historically, we use that as well to cover CSE, Committee on Special Education meetings, annuals, things like that. So there's a lot of gaps being filled by that. So that cut actually has one of those 2 days taken out. If you think, you know, it could cut half, so it could conceivably get rid of Wednesday and hold on to Thursday. I think that is doable. It's certainly not perfect, but it's something we can probably live with and work through. In all honesty, it's not as much of an issue anymore. We've done some really good things with sub, you know, applying and approving subs, but Wednesdays and Thursdays are always a day where, you know, if I have a teacher who's not covered or something, I always have that person there. But, you know, that is something conceivably out of some of these cuts, certainly that one, we could probably, you know, run our building and utilize it. It would be a little tougher, but we would make that work. The next 2 positions are positions that have been on the cut list when we're talking about, you know, in the past when we're talking about possible staffing cuts. I know that we're working to absorb some of those duties within existing staff, so that's actually, those are 2 things that wouldn't necessarily go away programmatic, while we're trying to work out some of the details there. And I'd like to point out, if that's the case, that's about almost a $70,000. That's like half of what we would need, more than half of what we would need to get in Tier 2. So. You know, we're working, like I said, right now to try to absorb preserve those 2 programs within existing staffing. So, and then just moving down between the other 3, obviously, similar to what was mentioned earlier, reduction of the assistant principal. You know, there's a lot of September through June duties, and then certainly July and August duties for that position. If you remember, the reason we really felt it was important district-wide to fund that position was because of just the increase in demands and workload of APPR, AIS, 504, those kind of things. So we spend an absorbent amount of time working in the summer, you know, dealing with academic intervention services as far as gathering the data, evaluating the data to determine eligibility, getting all the information out to families before the school year starts. Also, you know, communicating with the outgoing students, communicating with EMS with the outgoing students that are now transitioning to middle school. 504 is just as labor intensive over the summer. There's a lot of information, even though the students aren't here, that has to be carried over once the students are assigned to classes, rollover and review and updated of 504 plans. There's even meetings that happen over the summer to try to get, you know, we've had a lot of medical needs that have come into Chancellor, so there's a lot of time, especially the last several summers, of creating very in-depth, detailed medical 504s for students that have those medical needs. So that's a lot of the time that's spent over the summer. Again, I do have a list of that stuff that I can kind of send you guys. It's more conducive. We have it kind of organized from the school year and summer duties. And then, you know, another piece, a major piece over the summer that we're dealing with, Fern and I specifically, or that position, and myself specifically, have to do with the master schedule for the coming year. that information has really become a lot more important as far as the state and the timeliness of transferring those students over. Not exactly the same as the master schedule here, but the idea that every minute of every teacher's time during the day has to be assigned to a specific student, and that is very labor intensive. So there's a lot of that being done over the summer. So those things would have to be absorbed somehow. And certainly, I think it just goes back to the idea of quality versus quantity, and would be really valuable. Just moving down, the reduction of the typist, we do have the possibility of retirement, and I did intend on the possibility of reducing that position from a 12-month to a 10-month. We haven't come to the conclusion of that conversation, but we have discussed the possibility of a shifting of that, a current 10-month secretary being a 12-month, and then the current 12-month that I have being a 10-month. Really going back to a lot of the July and August responsibilities. So very often we're pulling that person from my office to support the assistant principal's office, and there has been a proposal to kind of shift those two. But that is something that would still entail a level of savings regardless of how we do that. And then the teacher aide is something I do have to say it would be very difficult to support in the idea that the perception that I have that much less kids in my building is not really true, and the idea of supervising an entire grade during lunch and recess. That would actually cut down from 6 to 5 aides that cover that major 2-hour part of the day where obviously unstructured times, and there's some structured games and things, but certainly students have freedom of choice during that time. We're watching up to 2 grades at any given moment during those 2 hours, either outside or in the cafeteria. And certainly with security and things like that, I feel 130 kids being supervised by only 2 people is a ratio I'm pretty uncomfortable with. So I would say that I do have some things that if we talk further, and I know today's not the penultimate conversation, but I do have some items that I think within my personal budget that I can transfer into to accommodate that as a possible cut. But kind of going back to those 2 positions, the tech and the AIS, there's tough decisions, but the idea being that we could absorb that, and I think that would get us halfway to the tier 2 if we had to go that route. So keep that in mind.
Questions?
Sorry, Steve.
Emily, I didn't hear your name mentioned at all throughout the summer work with AIS. Can you explain kind of your role and how you assist the principals in that?
Sure. In all 3 buildings, I work, as soon as our CSE meetings are over, I work on developing a spreadsheet and a snapshot of what sections are needed, and then work on scheduling the special education teachers. And it looks different in all 3 buildings, although we're shifting things a little bit at the secondary level this year. So it's really working with the assistant principals, and in some cases the principals, in fine-tuning and hand scheduling those individual students and those teachers, as well as the teaching assistant time and the teacher aide time.
And on a side note, I think redundancy in that system and the idea of that partnership between like IEPs and what's mandated, and I mentioned master schedule. Right. Primarily, I had mentioned that in the context of students and how they're assigned to teachers. But that also, and I mentioned the redundancy, not that we certainly don't trust the CSE office, but the idea that we have the CSE office looking at IEPs and things, and then the AP looking at the very same thing to apply that to our staffing and what their responsibilities, that's really a team effort.
Right, my lens is just those classified students or those ESL students in each building. It's the lens of the 504 compliance officer, the assistant principal, as well as the assistant principals who provide the AIS understanding of student needs, both academically and management-wise, to then create a true school-wide level of support for all of our students who are in need, whether they're classified or not. If we were to eliminate that type of partnership, which is certainly not a redundancy at all, that partnership, what will happen is that those CSE students are scheduled and the teachers are scheduled, but there would be those gaps in other areas of 504 or other AIS needs that may be overlooked until September 5th.
And that redundant piece I was referring to more along the lines of the fact, like Ed had said earlier, 2 sets of eyes looking at that, because to be honest, if it's on an IEP, that is a legally binding document. We need to make sure that we're now taking that information at the building level and really applying it to what the students need in the class, and there's no gaps in that service.
With the AS, is there, as far as how many students are in a class, is there best practice for that? I mean, different at all buildings, but, we have some, just looking at the master schedule, we have some AS classes going on at the same time with a couple of kids in one and a couple in another. How do we, can you speak to that a little bit?
Are you looking to me?
Yeah, I mean,
I would
well, whoever.
defer to my
Yeah, I guess.
So for the most part in the elementary school, that's not the case because they're just groups of kids in a specific grade, so it might look different than it does in,
Right.
it's not a class like it might be in middle school and high school. Correct me if I'm wrong, Fern, I think for the most part, we try to cap those groups at 5 or 6, because once you start getting to that larger group, you're kind of dealing with too much stuff, because they're high-need students that kind of need that remediation. The other piece there has to do with the possibility of, we also don't want it to supplant what's happening in the classroom. So there's a lot of that scheduling because it needs to supplement, not supplant. So anyway, that's about the cap we try to put on it, and I go from there.
And your buildings?
By custom and practice, typically half a dozen, 8 would be the maximum. The controlling factor in the high school is our master schedule. We really are reluctant to remove a student out of an elective in order to put that student into an academic support class. So we've got to find where our teacher availability meshes with student availability. And we typically, as you know, we're talking about 2, 3, 4 students in an academic support class, which gives the teacher the opportunity really to personalize the instructional environment to support the students to meet the standards on state exams.
It's 11:35. I want to be sure we have time to address any other questions that arise from what's proposed in Tier 2 before we go to public comment time.
What would the change in the $20,000 in computer leases mean?
As I reported out at the original meeting, we discussed this a little bit about the lease process. Currently, at the current funding levels that we have, the lease replacement cycle is approximately 6 years. So this would simply extend that out farther. And so hopefully it would sustain that replacement cycle.
The immediate impact would be, in this case, if we did reduce the leases by $20,000 because they're over 3 years, it would be approximately, not quite $60,000, but let's say somewhere in the low $50,000 worth of equipment that would not be purchased this coming year.
Other questions?
Well, there's one last thing here, and there are principals who can defend their assistant principals. I'd like to ask the superintendent maybe to defend our director of technology,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, and certainly I put that on the list with questions of my own. Steve works 12 months. He was hired, most of you will recall, as a result of a recommendation from the CELT audit, and as a result of the board's then multi-year technology plan. And at the risk of sounding flippant, and I couldn't give you an itemized list, less stuff will get done. He does a lot of stuff during the summer, especially because we're in that transition from the end of this year to the start of the next year. We have computer techs who work under his supervision to ghost machines and do repairs and install software. While he's not actually sitting there doing that installation, he's working with them to supervise and make sure things get done. So if that position were to be cut back to a 10-month position, we'd have to figure out some way to do that at the beginning of the, I don't have a pat answer for how that's going to work easily, but if we had to make that reduction, we'd have to find a workaround or front load more of that before the end of the school year. I don't have an easier answer than that to it. And less stuff would be done. or people would be working on things without his direct supervision if he weren't here during that time of year. So I mean, it's like many of the things on that tier 2 list of options that are, many of which are administrators have already addressed. Many of them are far from optimal. That said, if we need to close that gap, we need to look at every possible thing, even though it may not be an optimal arrangement, and that one isn't either. But if we had to look at that, then we'll have to look at that. And I won't ask you to speak in defense of yourself, Steve. That would not be cool. But I'm sure if the board needed further information about summer work that would have to be either rescheduled or not done, I'm sure Steve would work with me to develop such a list.
So I think what we should do is create a moment now for public comment. I do want to state again, as Superintendent Phelan has said, we have heard about some of the implications of these proposed reductions in the budget. This is an ongoing process. Listening and receiving further follow-up information from those who've spoken with us will be very helpful to us as we continue those conversations, and we hope everyone will continue to participate in the spirit of deliberation. So with that, may I invite public comment? There's a microphone here. Please identify yourself with your full name, and we are eager to hear from you.
Can I stand over here?
Yeah.
It's fine. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I feel bad turning my back
Steve,
on people.
No, it's better.
Just turn the mic
Mike that way.
Yeah, it's fine. That's good. He'll pick him up.
That's fine. That's fine. I have a loud voice. My name's Frank Selden. I have 2 girls in the middle school, in 6th grade, entertaining age. I'm not even sure where to start. Einstein famously said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? And so I don't know if I'm insane for coming here every year and trying to point out that this budget process is dangerous, right? Or if the district is insane for keeping doing it, right? We go through this every year, drip, drip, drip. We peel a little more away, we peel a little more away. We're not doing more with less, we're doing a little bit less with a lot less. And there's a big distinction, right? The whole world is in a model of trying to figure out how to do more with less. We need to get to that. We need to do more. Nowhere in this dialogue did I hear anything about metrics of the performance of the education. Are we getting better? How do we know? Okay, we don't. If I look at data, what is it, Newsweek, aren't they the one that does the big survey of
US
schools?
News and World Report.
US News, whoever it is, right? We have fallen dramatically. We used to be top 200 or 300. I don't think last year we made the top 1,000. We used to be top 10% in the state. I think last year we were in the mid-20s. Okay, you guys can double check that data.
Yeah, I'm not
close.
sure that's accurate.
Okay, I'm
but
close.
okay.
I may be off a couple of numbers here, but I'm close. Okay? I understand metrics of education are really hard, and I understand everybody can poke holes at them because nothing's perfect, but we better have some. And even silly ones like that US News thing, and I understand how thin that metric is and what it's based on, it's not a comprehensive metric. These things matter because parents like me, when we decide where to move to go to a school district, see it. When we moved here, whatever it is now, 9 years ago, that was part of our decision process. Part of our decision process was looking at the state test scores that are out there on the state website, okay? When I went back and looked at them a couple of years ago, the gap between this district and the premier districts in the state is widening, okay? Those are things people look at. Anybody who lives here that thinks the value of your house is important better be looking at those metrics.
because that's how the history is everywhere, that real estate value is largely driven by the quality of school districts. And that's what families look for. So we can poke holes at the metrics. None of them are perfect. I'm not trying to say they are, but we better be cognizant of them, and we better be talking about them, because that's the future of this community. So with that said, let me try not to be insane and repeat the same things I've said, and let me come at this a different way. Let me suggest some things, if I were leading this process, I would be asking for. Okay? One of them, and Tom, I know you're the king of data here, so I'm going to ask you, but obviously it's the board to then ask you. This is just my opinion. Okay? I'd love to go back and get a 5-year history of each of the major components of the budget, cost per student. The fact is, this year, whatever, my numbers might not be precise, 2.5% allowable tax cap increase. If I go back to something I saw in the minutes from the long-range planning, we add about 20 new kids a year, but the kindergarten class is about 40 less than the graduating class. So we have a net loss of 20, which is about 2%, rough numbers, but net, that budget cap allows us to increase our cost per student by 4.5% this year. And that's probably a pretty consistent number. Maybe some years it's 4, some years it's 5.5, whatever it is as the enrollment moves around and the budget cap moves around. What are the pieces of the budget that are outpacing that? Is it teachers? Is it administration? Is it fuel oil? What is it? Because that's what we need to attack. And if we can't attack it in year 1, we better start laying the groundwork to attack it in year 2 and year 3. In this process, we just keep deferring it. Well, I can't deal with it now, so I'll just worry about it next year. What was the comment somebody made about balloon payment budgeting? That's what we're doing. Okay, that's one thing I would look for. The other thing I would be looking for, I heard one of the principals talk about the data they kept, Regent scores. There's test scores. This is not about individual kids. This is aggregate. What's happening? The data's out there, okay? Nobody's asking to see individual kids or whatever. Let's get it out there. What's happening? Is our science getting better and our math getting worse? Is our social studies getting better and English getting worse? I don't know. But let's put it out there in front of us and figure out, where do we need to invest more to make this school district better? And again, I'm not defending all these tests. I understand all the issues with all these tests. Okay? But at least it's a place to start. Right? So with that, I mean, I could sit here and list 50 other things I would love to see, but if we just had those two things, and I realize there are a lot of work to pull together, that would give us a context to look at this whole thing. It was curious. I was just looking at the budget sheet that, Tom, you put together of the changes. I added up all the numbers. It adds up to about half the budget. So half the budget isn't even on the sheets we're talking about. Now, I understand there's fixed costs. We can't negotiate, or maybe we can negotiate fuel oil. I don't know, right? But let's put the whole thing out in front of us, right? And talk about, here's the pieces we're attacking, and here's the pieces we're not, and why. Because in the end, I live here so my kids get a great education. I'm convinced, and maybe I'm dead wrong, that if we came forward with a proposal to give our kids the best education and be a top school district, be in the top 10% or whatever it is, that suddenly that 60% tax cap would be a lot easier to take on. But as long as we're fighting from, we're going to cut less, there's no way, we're going to fail. It's a death spiral. Last year, I think I came and talked about Campbell's Soup taking, a gram of chicken every year out of the chicken soup, okay? And little by little, drip, 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 until about 10 years later, the bottom fell out. Well, that's the path we're on. So with that, I'm done. If I can help, I'm happy to. the kind of analysis or whatever, Tom, I'm happy. If you want to send me data or work with me, I'm happy to pull this together into presentations or whatever. I'm happy to help in any way I can, but we gotta tackle this thing. We can't keep doing this process over and over again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, I'm Victor Britton. I'm a committee member. I'm a science teacher here. I'm vice president of the Teacher Association here. I wanted to speak just to the overall process. Last year, we got some information about some of the things that were discussed today prior, so we could, talk about it. And that didn't happen. We didn't see these things until after we were seated here. And it would be good if we could talk with building administrators about them first, so they could get some input. It would probably be good if you guys had some initial questions, you could maybe do this, send them to the administrator so that they could collect data and talk to affected staff about it, so they could come and give you, better researched answers in regards to the things that you want to know. I do appreciate your efforts to preserve programs. Please involve teachers and staff as soon as possible to avoid rolling out untenable program changes that didn't really get worked out. If you roll them out in September, it's much harder to fix the plane after it's in the air. And sometimes that is a necessary thing that happens, but if it happens, if we have these sort of program changes that are in flux and we don't get to work them out in time, that's what ends up happening. In terms of folks that could be involved, I appreciate any effort made to treat any potentially affected employee with consideration and compassion. As this is going on, this adversely affects morale and efficiency for what we do here. And I'm not sure exactly what is under the hood of some of the itemized budget items on the big document, but I feel like there could be some things looked at that are need a more nebulous. Like the one thing I can sort of pick out of the big document is the curriculum council, which I don't think happened, and so that's $30,000, and money's not going to solve all the problems, but there might be some things that are not like on the surface as much as could be considered. And lastly, it seems like a lot of the proposed cuts that we're discussing are impacting directly or indirectly the direct instruction and contact time with the students. So I encourage you to try to be conscious of that. There's a lot of direct face time that is going to be impacted by some of the things that are considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else who wishes to come forward for public comment? Does anyone wish to respond to anything in the aftermath of public comment? I think I will just thank those who did come forward. The thoughts you share with us, the recommendations that you share with us, definitely impact our ongoing conversations, and we are grateful for your participation, we're grateful for your presence. We want to thank the building administrators for making the time to spend the entirety of their Saturday morning with us, talking about rather grim decisions that face all of us, and we do very much appreciate the feedback you were able to give us today, but also moving forward. I think the point Mr. Britton made is well taken, that there may be further thoughts you have on the basis of this conversation that you will continue to want to share with us, supporting information, other ideas, things under the hood that may yet occur to all of us as we move forward with budgeting. Do you want to make any final comments?
No, just to point out that in terms of today's particular activity, we're about 3 weeks earlier this year than we were last year. You can see that as good, bad, or indifferent. But we do have about 4 to 5 weeks before we need to make final decisions As it is every year, this is an opportunity to share ideas, again, good, bad, or indifferent, get feedback, primarily from our administrators who know the day-to-day operations of their buildings and their departments, which I think has been especially valuable this year, given our circumstance, as well as to get feedback from Frank and Victor and anybody else who wanted to say something but decided not to, say something to us offline. If you have an idea, let us know. Don't keep it hidden until after we have to make final decisions, and then it's too late. I think this was a good opportunity and I hope the board members feel like they got the information they wanted, and any follow-up, you guys know how to funnel it back to the board through me, so please don't hesitate. That's about all I have.
Okay, then I think we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much
Okay,
for
great.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.